A good friend of mine invited a few friends and me over to his hometown in the Philippines. He was visiting relatives for a few days, but he wanted to bring us along because he hasn't been back there since he was 7 and he was afraid that he might feel a bit alienated at first. We were hesitant to agree due to the cost of the trip and how rude it would be to intervene in a family reunion, but my friend explained that Filipinos really enjoyed the company and might even let us stay in one of their houses. To top it off, he showed us pictures of a stunning white, sandy beach right next to his hometown. And at this point, the offer was hard to decline. We went there a few weeks ago and just got back. What I experienced still haunts me, even though we have returned. I was a bit of a skeptic, and I would have probably been the last of my friends to believe old folklores, but it seems the locals provided better explanations than I could at those moments. For our first few days there, we were in Manila, the capital, and these days were some of the most normal. The cities there were pretty modernized, and the locals spoke decent English, so we didn't feel that set apart. We spent these first few days tasting the food and getting to know the culture. They were friendly people, but they weren't very chatty. By our fourth day, it was time to go to our friend's place, which was a long way from Manila, in a province called Bicol. We travelled by car, which nearly took us half the day, but the further we went, the more rural the places looked. Vast roads became rice paddies, and buildings became huts and old, wooden houses. The only vehicles on the road were rusty pickup trucks, pedicabs and jeepneys, and our rented Toyota Vios stuck out like a sore thumb. We stayed there for around 12 days, and here was some of our downright creepy experiences. Day 1. We arrived at my friend's place, and his family welcomed us with open arms. There was a simple party with enough food to feed the whole neighborhood, karaoke, which was a Filipino staple, and beer. It was all fun, and everything was laughing and singing until it started to get dark. And this was when it started to get strange. Immediately after the sun went down at around 6 p.m, they started cleaning up and guests started to leave. It was strange because it was so early and everyone still looked as if they were having fun. I asked my friend why the party was over so soon, and he just said that people in these parts hit the sack earlier, and they say it's not safe to go out at night. The thought of this place not being safe really confused me since the town was small and very rural, so criminals didn't seem like an issue. But I shrugged it off, and we slept in an extra room at my friend's house. Day 2. My friend brought us to his cousin's house down the street. He was close to her as a kid and really wanted to pay her a visit. She was 5 months pregnant, and he couldn't wait to see her. But when we got to the house, there were a few men boarding up the windows. My friend yelled at the men in Filipino, which I couldn't understand, and one of the men yelled back. My friend explained to us that he was her husband and that we could go right in. I climbed the steps to the door, which were strangely sprinkled with salt, and turned the doorknob, which hung a necklace of garlic. We apprehensively went into the house, and I could see his cousin sitting in a rocking chair, her belly slightly bloated. The two cousins chatted for a bit, until the strange modifications to the house were mentioned. We were all curious, and she could see that. She spoke in rough English for all of us to understand, and the words she managed to say were, "I'm afraid of the tick-tick." My friend scoffed at that statement, at which we all looked at them in confusion. My friend explained that the tik-tik was an old Filipino legend of a humanoid monster with a long tongue, which it used to suck out fetuses from the mother's womb. 3 things deterred the tik-tik and other Filipino monsters: salt, garlic, and anything blessed by a priest. Like my friend, I didn't think anything of it, but the fact that the locals would go through all this trouble meant that there must be something more to it. We went on our way and said goodbye to my friend's cousin, but that wasn't the last we were to see of her. Day 4. We were starting to get bored, so we decided to go to the beach. It was beautiful with crystal clear waters and smooth, white sand. The only thing strange was that there was nobody out there swimming, and everyone stayed well away from the water's edge. When we tried to get in the water, a fisherman went over to us and shouted at us to stay away. My friend went over to talk to him. The fisherman told him that a little boy went swimming in these waters the other day and went missing. When the boy's friends were questioned, they told the parents that he was just pulled down into the water and dragged by the ocean. There were some who speculated it was the work of a shokoi, a sea monster who drags swimmers into the deep waters to feast on their flesh. This was the second time a monster was mentioned to us during our stay. Though we didn't necessarily believe him at the time, we still didn't swim as respects to the missing boy. That night, we ran a little late getting back to the house, and as we rode the jeepney, the sun went down and it was pitch black, aside from the headlights made by the vehicle. We passed by a man walking alone beside the road, and when he saw us, he raised his hand, gesturing us to stop. The jeepney driver kept going and ignored the man. I told my friend to ask the driver why he ignored the potential passenger. My friend told me that the driver didn't pick up people this late, and that the driver feared that they might not even be people at all. Day 5. We woke up that day and were surprised to see that none of our stuff was as we left them when we fell asleep. Our bags were wide open and all the clothes were thrown around the room. The pillows were on the floor and the shoes were on the bed. The room was just in complete chaos. My cousin called for his grandfather, whom owned the house, to see the mess. He looked around the room and chuckled. We asked him what he was laughing about. He whispered something to my friend, who translated his message. He told us that the children must have gotten into the room. It was strange since we never saw any children in the house before. I asked the old man if they had kids in the house, and he managed to make out the words, "used to." After this experience, I grew ever fearful of what this town had to hide and how much truth these legends had. Day 7. A couple days ago, we learned that nobody went outside of their homes at night in fear of some strange things. But it turns out not everybody followed that rule. That morning, the whole town was distressed as the body of a teenage boy was found beside a clump of banana trees near a densely wooded forest. He had been impaled by a sharp piece of bamboo sticking out of the ground. He was supposedly with a girl that night, but no trace of her has been found. My friend had overheard some gossip from the townsfolk, and explained what the locals thought had happened. It turns out the two had been seeing each other behind their parents' back, as teenagers do, and that these two teenagers weren't particularly superstitious, so they arranged meetups at night, despite the elders warning them of the dangers of going out after dark. It is said that a colony of encantos, which are sort of like fairies, but a lot more sinister than those in fairy tales, lived in those banana trees. The prince saw the young lady and wanted to take her as his bride. These creatures had the ability to control nature, so the prince made a bamboo grow out of the ground and stabbed the boy in the chest. He took the girl away to the land of Encantos, where she is forever trapped. Normally, I would just brush these stories off as nonsense, but after all that I've heard, I don't know what to believe. Day 9. We didn't do much that day because one of my friends caught a terrible fever. He was burning up, and the nearest drugstore was miles away. Without our knowledge, my friend's grandfather called in a witch doctor, and from my first look at him, I knew he was nothing more than a quack. He was a frail old man, who looked as if he needed the medical attention. With him, he carried a basket of leaves, herbs, candles, and other junk. I didn't want him to touch my friend because I feared it would only make him worse. But the family insisted, and we let the doctor into the room. He felt my friend's forehead, and he asked him to take off his shirt. My friend was sweaty and pale as the quack rubbed a bunch of leaves on his back. The doctor faced the family and asked them for something. My friend ran over to stop them, but his family assured him, and he sat back down. I asked him what happened, and he said that the doctor asked for the juice of a 1-day-old puppy. I was surprised and confused, and was unable to speak at the thought of it. 1 hour later, a relative arrived with a bowl of slimy, red liquid. The doctor grabbed it and mixed in some herb, which looked a bit like mint. He held it in front of my friend's mouth and made him drink it. I nearly barfed at the horrifying sight, but couldn't speak due to the utter shock. The doctor stood and left the room, as did my friend's family. When we were alone, we argued amongst ourselves on why we would let that nut even touch our friend. We stopped, as our friend slowly sat up and looked at us with his normal, reddish, tan skin. He no longer felt warm, nor did he show any signs of ever being sick in the first place. The doctor cured him. I don't know how, but he did. Day 10. This was a Sunday, and when we woke up in the morning, my friend's family was already urging us to go to church. The church was Catholic, and they kept the doors open to let the air in, which made sense in the warm climate. A few of my friends and I, who weren't Catholic, stayed outside while pretty much the rest of the town was in the church. It was about midway through the service when an old man arrived. He just stood outside, staring at us with a creepy grin. The townsfolk started to notice him and immediately gestured for us to go inside. We followed. Once we were through the doorframe, the man's grin disappeared. Everyone was just staring at him, wondering what he would do next. A few minutes later, he left, and the mass continued, as if nothing ever happened. We went over to our friend and asked who the hell that was, and he told us nobody knew. I asked why the whole town seemed afraid of him if they don't even know him. He simply replied, "In such a small town, not knowing somebody is scary." I still had a lot of questions in my mind, but decided to keep them to myself. Who was that man? Why was he intently staring at us? And why did he not follow us into the church? Day 11. We were woken up by the sounds of screaming, coming from a few houses away. It was early, around 3 a.m., and the whole town ran out of their houses to see the commotion. It came from the house of my friend's cousin. We ran over there, still in my pajamas, to see a decently large crowd gathered in front of their house. The husband was climbing down the steps, frantically shouting something in Filipino. My friend looked over at my other friend and grabbed her shoulder. He told her that they needed medical attention. She nodded and walked over to a frightened man, with the rest of us following closely behind. She tells the man that she's a paramedic, and he grabs her hand, tears flowing down his face, and yells "Salamat," which is one word I actually know. It means thank you. He leads her inside the house, and we quickly follow. The woman was sitting on the rocking chair, her face wet from tears and sweat. My friend does a quick checkup of her, feeling her belly and asking her questions while my other friend translates. After a moment, my paramedic friend looked up at us, horrified. "Her baby is gone," she said. The rest of us were just in shock. She asked the couple if they had a miscarriage, and they denied. She told us that there were fresh puncture wounds on her belly button, as if someone poked a large syringe through it. This puzzled us, as there was no way any intruder could have gotten into the house since they boarded up all the windows, and the couple said they had locked the door. It started to rain outside, and I noticed the ceiling started to leak. I looked up and saw there was a golf ball-sized hole on the roof. I asked the couple about the hole, and at first, they seemed confused, like they didn't know that they had a very noticeable hole in their ceiling. When the woman saw it, she got down on her knees and cried. She kept shouting words in Filipino, constantly yelling out "tik tik," which was the only word I understood. When the sun rose, my paramedic friend and Filipino friend stayed in the house while the rest of us left. I can never forget what transpired in that house. Day 12. This was the day we left, and to be honest, I was relieved, but I was also frustrated. We didn't leave with happy memories or refreshed spirits. Instead, we were left with questions about the town where my friend had spent his childhood. But perhaps the biggest question that bothered me is if there were any other towns like this in the Philippines, or if all of them were just like this town. I guess these questions won't be answered now, and I don't know if I'm ever coming back. We left the town, and as our car drove away, we looked back to see all of the locals waving their hands in goodbye. They looked as if they were relieved that we have left.